Right now, as you're reading this, your body is doing something remarkable. It's managing a delicate chemical balancing act that keeps every single one of your organs alive and functioning. At the center of that act is glucose, a simple sugar that serves as the primary fuel for your cells, and a hormone that acts as the key that unlocks your cells so that sugar can actually get inside and be used. When that system breaks down, the consequences ripple across nearly every major organ in the body, and that breakdown is exactly what we call diabetes. Today, we have more people living with diabetes than at any other point in recorded human history, over 500 million adults worldwide, and the numbers are climbing even faster among children and teenagers. And here's the part that should really get your attention. Even after accounting for population growth, the rate of diabetes has roughly doubled since the early 1990s. Human DNA doesn't change that quickly, which means something in our environment and our daily habits is driving this explosion. And that's actually a hopeful thing, because what lifestyle can cause, lifestyle can often undo. So today, Dr. Leana is going to walk you through the full picture, what's actually happening inside your body when blood sugar regulation fails, the difference between the two main types of diabetes, why your pancreas is more central to this story than most people realize, and what the long-term damage looks like when the condition goes unmanaged. Let's start with the basics of how blood sugar is supposed to work, because you truly cannot understand why diabetes is dangerous until you understand what the healthy system looks like. Every time you eat carbohydrates, whether that's rice, bread, fruit, or a chocolate bar, your digestive system breaks those carbs down into glucose, which then gets absorbed through your intestinal lining into your bloodstream. Your blood glucose levels rise. Your body detects this rise, and almost immediately, your pancreas swings into action. The pancreas is a fascinating organ tucked just behind your stomach. It has two completely separate jobs. One as a digestive organ, secreting enzymes into the small intestine to help break down food, and one as an endocrine organ, producing hormones that manage your metabolism. For the purposes of blood sugar, the key players are tiny clusters of cells within the pancreas called beta cells, and their job is to produce and release insulin. Insulin is the hormone that acts as a signal to your body's cells, essentially announcing that glucose is available and that the cells should open up and take it in. When insulin binds to receptors on the surface of your cells, it triggers a cascade of activity inside the cell that allows glucose to move from the bloodstream into the cell, where it can be converted into energy. Blood sugar levels come back down, your cells are fueled, and the system resets. It's elegant, efficient, and when it works correctly, it happens dozens of times a day without you ever noticing. But when it fails, even partially, the damage is slow, cumulative, and ultimately severe. Type 1 diabetes is the less common form, accounting for roughly 5 to 10% of all cases, and it tends to appear earlier in life, often during childhood or adolescence, though it can develop at any age. The mechanism here is an autoimmune attack. Your own immune system mistakenly identifies the beta cells in your pancreas as foreign invaders and destroys them. Once those beta cells are gone, your pancreas can no longer produce insulin. And without insulin, glucose has no way to get into your cells, so it accumulates in your bloodstream instead. This isn't caused by diet or lifestyle choices. It's driven by a combination of genetic predisposition and what amounts to biological bad luck, and it cannot currently be prevented or reversed. People with type 1 diabetes require insulin therapy to survive, and while researchers are making exciting progress on ways to restore or replace beta cell function, there is no proven method yet to bring those cells back once they've been destroyed by the immune system. Type 2 diabetes is a fundamentally different disease with a fundamentally different mechanism, even though it produces a similar end result: chronically elevated blood glucose. In type 2 diabetes, the pancreas is still producing insulin, at least at first, but the body's cells have become resistant to insulin's signal. Think of it as the cells developing a kind of selective hearing. Insulin is knocking at the door, but the cells aren't responding the way they should. To compensate, the pancreas ramps up production, churning out more and more insulin to try to force the cells to respond. In the earliest stages of type 2 diabetes, this compensation can actually be effective enough that blood glucose levels remain in the normal range, which is one of the reasons the condition can be silently progressing for years before it's diagnosed. A fasting glucose, or A1C test, might look fine while the underlying dysfunction is already building, which is why clinicians who suspect metabolic trouble may also look at insulin levels directly or use glucose tolerance testing to get a fuller picture. Over time, though, the pancreas cannot sustain that level of overproduction. The beta cells wear down, insulin output drops, and blood glucose levels begin to creep upward. First, into what's called the pre-diabetic range, and eventually into full-blown type 2 diabetes. In some people, the beta cells become so exhausted over the course of years that they stop producing adequate insulin entirely, meaning someone who started out with type 2 diabetes may eventually need insulin injections as well. This progression is not inevitable, but it does happen, and it's one of the strongest arguments for catching and addressing metabolic dysfunction early. Now let's talk about what actually causes insulin resistance to develop in the first place, because understanding the cause is what makes the prevention strategy make sense. Genetics play a role. Having a family history of type 2 diabetes increases your personal risk by 2 to 3 times, and certain ethnic backgrounds carry a higher baseline risk as well. But the factor that DoctorLeana emphasizes most often, because it's also the most modifiable, is excess body fat, particularly the fat stored inside your abdominal cavity, wrapped around your internal organs, which is called visceral fat. Visceral fat is not just passive storage. It's metabolically active tissue that releases a constant stream of inflammatory signaling molecules, including a class called adipokines, which interfere with the ability of muscle, liver, and fat cells to respond properly to insulin. This is why people with higher amounts of visceral fat have significantly elevated rates of insulin resistance, even if their total body weight doesn't look extreme on the outside. It's the fat you can't see that tends to be the most problematic. The genuinely encouraging news is that reducing visceral fat through a combination of consistent exercise and dietary changes directly improves insulin sensitivity. And here's something remarkable about exercise specifically. When your muscles contract during physical activity, they can absorb glucose from the bloodstream without requiring insulin at all. This is a completely separate pathway, and it means that even before the long-term metabolic adaptations kick in, a single workout session is actively lowering your blood sugar. With consistent training over time, your muscles also develop more mitochondria, upregulate metabolic enzymes, and become substantially more efficient at glucose handling even at rest. Exercise is, in a very real physiological sense, one of the most targeted treatments we have for the exact mechanism that drives type 2 diabetes. Now, about that visceral fat. You've probably heard claims that certain exercises specifically burn belly fat or target visceral fat more than subcutaneous fat. DoctorLeana wants to be clear about what the science actually says here. You cannot direct your body to selectively burn one type of fat through a specific movement or exercise. Fat loss happens systemically, pulled from both visceral and subcutaneous stores. However, visceral fat does happen to be more metabolically responsive to a caloric deficit and regular exercise, meaning it tends to shrink relatively quickly when someone commits to a consistent routine. So, while you're not targeting it specifically, it often responds faster than the fat just beneath the skin, which is likely where those claims of burning belly fat come from. It's a real observation, just explained by the wrong mechanism. When it comes to diet, there's no single perfect eating pattern for preventing or managing type 2 diabetes, but the broad principles are consistent. Minimize ultra-processed foods and added sugars. Prioritize whole foods with fiber, lean protein, and healthy fats. Manage overall caloric intake to support a healthy body composition. And don't get so caught up in the latest dietary trend that you lose sight of the fundamentals. Now let's get to the part that really explains why diabetes is considered so dangerous if left unmanaged: the long-term damage that accumulates when blood glucose stays elevated over years and decades. Glucose itself isn't toxic at normal levels, but when it's chronically elevated, it causes a process called glycation, where sugar molecules attach to proteins and fats throughout your body and interfere with their normal function. The tissues most vulnerable to this damage are the ones served by the smallest, most delicate blood vessels, and unfortunately, that includes some of your most critical organs. In the eyes, damage to the tiny blood vessels of the retina leads to a condition called diabetic retinopathy, which is the leading cause of preventable blindness in working-age adults worldwide. In the kidneys, similar vascular damage impairs the filtration system, eventually leading to diabetic nephropathy, and, in severe cases, kidney failure requiring dialysis or transplant. In the nervous system, a combination of direct nerve damage and impaired blood supply to nerve tissue causes diabetic neuropathy, the numbness, tingling, burning, and loss of sensation that typically begins in the feet and hands and can progress to severely impaired sensation, increasing the risk of unnoticed injuries, infections, and, in serious cases, amputation. And on a larger scale, chronically elevated blood sugar damages the walls of major blood vessels, accelerating atherosclerosis and dramatically raising the risk of heart attack and stroke. Diabetes is one of the most powerful risk multipliers for cardiovascular disease, and heart disease remains the leading cause of death among people with diabetes. This is the full scope of what's at stake when metabolic dysfunction goes unaddressed. It's not just about blood sugar numbers on a lab report. It's about the cascading structural damage happening silently in vessels and nerves over years. So, what does treatment actually look like? For type 1 diabetes, insulin replacement is non-negotiable and lifelong. The body cannot produce it, and without external insulin, the consequences are life-threatening. For type 2 diabetes, the first and most foundational treatment is lifestyle modification, improving diet quality, increasing physical activity, and reducing body fat. Metformin is typically the first medication introduced when lifestyle changes alone aren't sufficient, and it works through several mechanisms, including reducing glucose output from the liver and improving cellular insulin sensitivity. If blood sugar remains poorly controlled, additional medications may be layered in. GLP-1 receptor agonists, which mimic appetite-regulating hormones and improve glucose metabolism. SGLT2 inhibitors, which cause the kidneys to excrete excess glucose in urine. Or, eventually, insulin itself if beta cell function has declined enough. The part that DoctorLeana finds most worth emphasizing is this. Type 2 diabetes is one of the few chronic diseases where aggressive lifestyle intervention can produce what looks, functionally, like a complete reversal. When someone with type 2 diabetes loses significant body fat, exercises consistently, and overhauls their diet, their blood glucose levels can return to entirely normal ranges without any medication. The medical community is careful not to call this a cure because the underlying predisposition doesn't disappear. If the person returns to the lifestyle patterns that triggered the disease, it will come back. The correct term is remission. But remission is real, it's achievable for many people, and it represents one of the most powerful illustrations of how much agency we actually have over our metabolic health. The numbers may feel overwhelming. Over 500 million people, doubling rates, rising cases in kids. But the biology is ultimately on our side, because the same mechanisms that drive type 2 diabetes respond directly to the choices we make every single day. That's the part worth holding on to.